Welcome to Leaders Recon, where we will be discussing leadership, warrior skills, and other unique opportunities within the G3 Leader Development Branch. I'm your host, Joshua Carr, and today we're going to be discussing multi-domain operations and modernization with Lieutenant Colonel Judd Mahfouz. Lieutenant Colonel Mahfouz, welcome to the program.
Happy to be here. So
for those in our audience who are not familiar with your background, could you kind of highlight, some of your experience both on the civilian and military sides?
Sure. I'm a traditional guardsman, which means I've spent my entire service in the National Guard. Mm-hmm. I enlisted in the Louisiana National Guard in 1988. Went to Desert Storm in 91, got back, was coming up on the end of my initial term of service. I think that's called ETS. Yeah, initial term of service. Had the opportunity to go to officer candidate school, the state officer candidate school. Did that, was commissioned in 1993 under the old Reserve Officer Management Act, which required you to be a lieutenant for 60 months. You were going to be a second lieutenant for 3 years and then a first lieutenant for 2. So, people think I'm a late bloomer. It's not that. I was just commissioned under an old law. Did the typical officer assignments in Louisiana to include my company command and what you call key and developmental assignments, battalion XO, just kind of circulated through the brigade 3 shops. So, I was basically in operations.
So were you always a traditional guardsman then?
Yeah, I was, because I loved my civilian job. I was a high school teacher and a football coach in one of the largest high schools in Louisiana. Great tradition. It was the only high school in this particular, we call them parishes, but you think of them as counties. But yeah, I absolutely love what I was doing. You can teach and coach and starve to death. So my decision to leave that vocation was more of a financial one because I got married and started having children.
So do you have a football team then?
Yeah, at all levels. So, and obviously in high school, it's the Ruston High School Bearcats. I have to go with my alma mater for my college team, Louisiana Tech University Bulldogs. Go Bulldogs. Which everyone looks at me crazy because why aren't you an LSU fan? Isn't everybody from Louisiana an LSU fan? I'm like, well, no, not necessarily. My wife went to LSU, so we are forced to watch the LSU games. But I'm a diehard, dyed-in-the-wool Louisiana Tech fan. And then, of course, pro teams, I'm not really a fan of a particular team. I follow players and coaches. Right now, I'm a Kansas City fan just because I like Patrick Mahomes. It doesn't matter that they won. They could have lost, every ball game last year, and I'd still be a fan of Kansas City because of Patrick Mahomes. As you know, 9/11 happened. In fact, I was in airborne school on 9/11. I was in jump school. We were in the harnesses, and that's during Tower Week. Hopefully you'll get to skip Tower Week. Hopefully there'll be too much wind. The towers are terrifying. But anyway, the Black Hats came in. They kind of indexed training. They got everybody around. They told us what was going on. Of course, we thought they were just messing with us. because Black Hats, that's what they do. They mess with you unmercifully during airborne school. And no, they told us that 2 planes had hit the towers in New York, and that one had hit the Pentagon. They sent us all back to our BOQs, BAQs, whatever you call them, what we called them back then, our temporary lodging. They recalled us the next day. Fort Benning went to ThreatCon Delta, which is it's the highest force protection condition there is. You have to have an ID just to get in individual buildings, much less on post. Recalled us the next day. General Moyne was the chief of the infantry at the time. He personally spoke to every student at Fort Benning and says, hey, our mission is a training mission. We are going to continue to train, but some of you are going to be accelerated. So if you had orders for buds, Navy SEAL guys, if you had orders for any kind of EOD, if you had orders for any of the Special Forces groups, if you had orders for the 160th Special Aviation Operations Regiment, you were gone. Those guys got their jumps all in one day, and then they got their night jump, and then we never saw them again. uh, except when those poor guys that were going to the Ranger Indoctrination program got picked up. And it was a different world because we were now a nation at war. So the RIs that showed up to pick up the 75th guys were a little bit more hands-on, if you can imagine. But then I got back to my state, and it was, we are a nation at war, and so just it's not a matter of if you're going to deploy; it's when you're going to deploy. After 3 deployments, I got offered a job at National Guard Bureau, and I've been on the ADR program ever since. That was back in 2008, and I've deployed a time or two since I've been on the ADR program.
So, sir, long-range precision fires is something that I've heard the term thrown around. I know there's like 6 main lines of effort for modernization that have been outlined by the Chief of Staff. Can you kind of give us an overview of what modernization looks like for the Army of 2028?
It's the idea that in order to be multi-domain operations capable and then at some point be dominant, that we have to modernize our warfighting systems. Precision long-range fires is just one of them. Our cyber and space capabilities is another. I mean, even how we shoot, move, and communicate on the battlefield, modernizing some of our legacy FBCT systems, FBCB2 systems that we used in the CENTCOM AOR, like Blue Force Tracker, like CPOF, bringing all that up and modernizing it to really work off things like 5G, 5th generation networks. So if you ask me what modernization was, I would take you probably down to Futures Command and say, this is modernization. But then you kind of have to redact that to understand what it really is. Yes, it's precision long-range fires. Yes, it's artificial intelligence. Yes, it's unmanned robotic systems. Yes, it's space and cyberspace, communication suites, capabilities. But modernization it's not a new concept. The way we organize, train, and equip the Army has always been underpinned by modernization. I mean, we want the most modern, most advanced, most lethal systems in our formation. Multi-domain operations is not a new concept. If you go back to the Story Report, which was written after the Yom Kippur War, where General Story said, "Hey, if you want to know how to synchronize air and land domain operations, study what Israel did in the Yom Kippur War." That was our first real example of air-land battle or multi-domain battles. And so we are modernizing for one reason and one reason only. So if you look at the modernization strategy that came out in October of 2019, General McConville, the Chief of Staff of the Army, says we're going to modernize for multi-domains capability by 2028, and then for multi-domain operations dominance by 2035. And of course, 2035 is the mark on the wall for when China will have the largest blue water navy in the world.
Or what caused the change? What was the shift in the military's focus? We've been spending the last 20 years fighting in COIN operations. What made the change now?
Yes, COIN was the focus for almost 20 years. I mean, COIN is a tactic. I don't know if it's necessarily a strategy, but the focus shifted really with this incoming administration. So President Trump was elected in 2016. His first national security strategy was released in January of 2017, which said that we are going to focus on great power competition, or he called it a return to great power competition, much like the great power competition between the United States and Russia, or the Soviet Union rather, during the Cold War. Except the great power competition, it would be with our near peer competitors China and a resurgent Russia. That led to the December 2018 National Defense Strategy, which basically said yes, the same thing. It's a return to great power competition with the focus on the 2+3 threats. So the 2 were Russia, China, the 3 were North Korea, Iran, and then the 1 non-state actor we call violent extremist organizations.
Okay. The military's been talking a lot about the acquisitions process and the monies, that it takes to fund modernization. And I've heard the term night court thrown around a lot. Well, can you explain to our listeners, what is night court, and how did that come to be?
Night court was born out of Dr. Esper, the president. He's now the Secretary of Defense, but when he was the Secretary of the Army, he started these deep dives into every one of the program evaluation groups, every one of the PEGs, all the MDEPs. We're talking pennies, accounting for pennies. So during these night courts, when they were doing this very holistic deep dive review of all the Army's programming, planning, budgeting, and execution processes, he found out that there was about $40 billion with a B dollars of redundant spending, of wasteful spending, and so he took that culture of fiscal responsibility to the department writ large. So now, as the Secretary of Defense, he's requiring all the services to do a deep dive into their planning, programming, budgeting, and execution processes to identify where we can, save money.
I don't know off the top of my head what the entirety of the budget for the National Guard is.
It's about $40 billion.
That's what I was going to say. I thought it was about the same.
But it's just a coincidence that that's what was found to be redundant in the night courts.
So how will some of the new fielding of equipment impact the National Guard then, and what does that look like? I know you've talked before about a couple different phases or waves of.
Right, and you mentioned some of the capabilities of our offset strategies, long-range fires, deep learning machines, human-machine collaboration, and then some of your capabilities in space and cyberspace. Those are the operations, activities, investments that we're going to make in order to modernize for multi-domain operations. Now, what it's going to look like for the Guard. So modernization for MDO is focused on 2 what we're calling force packages. And these force packages are going to enable us to do multi-domain operations. There are no Guard units in force package 1. However, there are Guard units in force package 2. We know because the Army strategic planning guidance that came out last summer in June says every Guard infantry brigade combat team, which is about 18, and we're talking infantry, not striker brigade combat team, not armor, although both those are important. Each one of the IBCTs will get what they're calling a mobile protected firepower company. It's basically a light tank company of 14 platforms that will be assigned to either the brigade headquarters for a separate brigade, or if it's division aligned brigade, it'll be in the division headquarters, and they'll be sliced out to the separate battalions based on the main effort. So if you got 3 maneuver battalions in an armor brigade combat team, two tank battalions, one Bradley battalion, you could imagine whichever one is the main effort would get the preponderance of those platforms. If it's a division aligned brigade, then it's up to the division commander how he uses them, and he may keep them together instead of slicing them out. But that will be fielded in 2024 in anticipation of a multi-domain operations division minus CTC, which will focus strictly on multi-domain operations. Or if I can do a small infomercial, soon to be joint all domain operations as soon as the new doctrine is written. But it's still multi-domain operations for now, soon to be joint all domain operations soon.
So, sir, what did you mean when you said offset strategy?
The American way of war is to achieve overwhelming strategic overmatch against our competitors, our adversaries.
Okay.
During World War II and World War I, that was attrition. It was air breathing asset for air breathing asset, man for man, bullet for bullet. You wanted a numerical advantage, so we're talking about a quantitative advantage. Well, after the Cold War ended and we drew down, we got rid of corps, we got rid of divisions. We went to we called a million man or a million soldier army, which is made up of the majority of it, about 470,000 is in the active component, Compo 1, and the rest is in the National Guard, Compo 2. About 343,000 and some change, and then about 100,000 in the United States Army Reserve, with the ability to surge if we had to. I mean, if it was a full mobilization, of course we would have to build up the size of our force, but we wouldn't have to immediately because we seek what we call a qualitative comparative advantage. That means leveraging technology to offset the disparity in quantity. So the second offset strategy was some of those capabilities that you mentioned, long-range fires, unmanned aerial vehicles, ISR, satellites that enabled global positioning and navigation, think GPS satellites. Okay. The third offset strategy was really high-end technologies, artificial intelligence, machine learning, quantum computing, human-machine combat teaming, where a warfighter would interface with a machine in order to speed up things like decision-making. And then augmentation systems, where a soldier would be augmented by a machine in order to increase performance. Think of some of like your exoskeletons. Think about some drones that are so small that every soldier would have an ISR asset that was organic to that soldier as a system, where he could fly over the horizon, in order to enable fire and maneuver.
You mentioned World War II, right? Mm-hmm. Where war of attrition, right?
Right. Well, until the atomic bomb, of course.
Okay.
That was the ultimate offset strategy. The first offset strategy was the atom bomb, but yes.
So like if you look at just, let's go to tanks, right? And you have the ratio of American tanks to German tanks at the time. They clearly had a better platform than we did, right?
And more of them, because they were fighting the home game. They were on their home turf. All of our tanks, we had to get there some way.
Obviously, we came out of that conflict victorious, taking some of the same strategy, moving on into the modern era. When technologies and stuff get utilized, what's your view on as a strategist, on how we don't end up like Germany, right? We don't end up in the situation where our platform and equipment is better, but we're facing drone swarms, or for example, right? That's I know that's a really basic example, but
not really. You make a good point. How do we maintain our qualitative advantage? Well, that's investment in research, development, and engineering. Dr. Michael Griffin is the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Development, and he has really empowered the Strategic Capabilities Office and DARPA to do some very cutting-edge research that is unencumbered by traditional budgetary and acquisitions processes. So if you're familiar with the Army acquisitions process, it is very complex. It takes a long time to get to what we call milestone B, where it becomes a program of record. Well, the Strategic Capabilities Office and DARPA they're exempt from traditional tier one acquisition programs, milestones, and timelines.
Okay.
So they are really working on some cutting edge stuff, especially with unmanned autonomous systems. I mean, you think about that. We have unmanned systems, but somewhere there's a soldier at a console. Now we're talking about an autonomous system, a system that can think and make decisions for itself. And as long as and that's the whole movement behind STEM and partnering with academia, this all goes back to what Dr. Griffin is trying to do with RD&E. It's basically make sure that we maintain our qualitative advantage,
Okay.
Even though they might have bigger, they might have better, they might have more. We'll have the best, most advanced systems, cutting edge stuff, really.
So you kind of mentioned this already about the domains, but can you highlight for our listeners, like when we hear the term multi-domain operations, what are those domains and how has technology, shifted the way we think about those?
Well, there's the terrestrial domains. There's land, sea, and air, and then there's the extraterrestrial of space and cyberspace, non-contiguous, non-tactile domain. Under multi-domain operations, the primacy of space and cyberspace has been elevated. So we're talking about a layered defense in space, something that we've never thought about before. I mean, we've used space for peaceful reasons. I mean, we have satellites in space that are defense satellites. You have weather monitoring satellites. You have ISR satellites. You have communication satellites. You have GPS satellites. And then that final layer in what we call geosynchronous orbit, 35,000 kilometers above the Earth, you have missile warning satellites, infrared detection satellites. But if you think about all those satellites and what they do, everything else, all the joint functions, all the Army warfighter functions are controlled from space. And that's got to give us some pause and maybe a strategic inflection point to where we say, how vulnerable are we in space? And how do we harden our satellites? Because if you lose a GPS satellite, a communication satellite, even a weather monitoring satellite where you can assess and anticipate the effects of weather on your operations. You don't have to do anything kinetic to render a division commander blind, deaf, and dumb. All you have to do is jam the uplink of his GPS satellite. Then what's he going to do? Pull out a map and a compass, which that's an important skill, but it's certainly a perishable skill and not one that we would prefer to do. But in multi-domain operations, it's the primacy of space and cyberspace that we're really emphasizing in importance.
So I know I've heard you say before, jointness matters.
Mm-hmm.
When we're looking at interoperability between all these different functions as the whole scheme turns from, green and blue to more purple across the formation, what are skills that, soldiers and young leaders can work on developing that enables them to fight and win, in the multi-domain warfare?
Well, and if you take it back to, the basic soldier individual skills, shoot, move, and communicate.
Okay.
Shoot, move, and communicate in a multi-domain battlefield is going to be much different than what we're used to, because not only do you have to be able to talk to, your adjacent units, higher, lower, left and right, but you also have to be able to talk to units in the air and units at sea, and your space enabler teams as far as getting bandwidth on a satellite, and then be able to deploy cyber effects, jamming, electronic warfare. So the soldier of 2028, when we say we're going to be multi-domains, fully operation capable, and the soldier of 2035 is going to have a pretty deep skill set, because he is going to be required to layer those things seamlessly, and be able to operate seamlessly in all domains with all services. That's why interoperability matters. Jointness matters. I mean, going back to the Goldwaters-Nichols Act of 1986, the Department of Defense Reform Act, we said jointness matters, but we never really talked about jointness in terms of the acquisitions process until the capstone concept for joint operations came out and said, hey, these are the investments that we need to make that are going to enable force development and force design for a truly joint force. That means communication systems. That means battle ISR. That means unmanned aerial. All the systems that enable multi-domain operations and jointness have to be modernized as well. I mean, you can modernize all your major platforms, but if you don't modernize everything in say, a Bradley fighting vehicle that makes that combat capable, the communication systems, the navigation systems, the weapon systems, then have you really modernized, I guess.
So, sir, you've talking a lot about multi-domain operations, modernization, and what that is. For the leaders out in the formation today, what are things they can do if they're wanting to lean forward to prep for like training plans or things when we're looking at the near-peer fight now and we're looking at multi-domain operations from that perspective?
Well, so the Army has a training strategy. It's called the Sustainable Readiness Model. And basically it's a yearly progression of how we build readiness up to a culminating training event like a NTC or a JRTC or a JMRC rotation in Hohenfels. And for the leaders in our formations from the division on down to the team leader, we're going to have to reimagine how we think about readiness, and not just, can I shoot if I'm, an ABCT, can I shoot table 8? Can I shoot table 12? Can I do a combined arms live fire exercise? And can I do a fire coordination exercise or field training exercise? Yes, those things will still have to be done, but how will you train to ensure that you are multi-domains capable and multi-domain dominant? Obviously, it's going to depend on how soon you modernize, how soon we field some of these systems, like the mobile protected firepower, like the new long-range fires capabilities. But the important thing is to keep up with the doctrine, of course. I mean, I'm a big proponent of lifetime learning. Not necessarily going to a school where you're a student. It's just doing layman's research. The entire world is indexed on Google and YouTube, and so I would encourage people to sit down and put MDO in your search engine. Put Army modernization in your search engine and look at some of the million things that you get. I would encourage commanders especially to read the Army Modernization Strategy and the Army Modernization Strategy Implementation Plan, where we talk about how we're going to do CTC rotations starting in 2024. That will require us to be multi-domains, capable, functional, and interoperable. Read things like the Army Strategic Planning Guidance, where it says the Guard is going to get these mobile protected firepower platforms. And then, the owners of Army Doctrine, TRADOC, Combined Arms Command, and Features Command to some, they have open source public domain sites where you, Lieutenant Josh Carr, or me can go and get the latest pubs and they're FOUO, but you have to sign in with your CAC. You got to go to the Reimer Digital Library. But, you can stay current without necessarily being a student in a pure academic setting, like your PME or some of your MOSQ schools.
So as a strategist, then, do you see the National Guard's role shifting as like Force Package 1 comes out and portions of the Army are modernizing?
I think it's a sliding scale. So we're going to build readiness and modernize at the same time. But that requires the Army to offload some of its mission sets, and they'll be offloaded to the Guard. I mean, we've always picked up mission sets where it was necessary for us to, whether it enables the Army to kind of take a knee and rebuild readiness and modernize. So the Guard, you can't really separate the Guard's role from the Army and modernization. We will modernize at a different schedule, of course, but on the sliding scale of operations, modernization, and readiness, the Army will have to at some point divest itself of some mission sets, and the Guard, as we've always done since we became the Guard, we will pick up some of those mission sets and enable the Army to recover readiness and modernize, and then it'll be our turn. But that's a role that we've always used to add value to the total force concept.
So I know you talked a little bit, sir, on the reliance on technology, satellites, cyberspace for all levels of command. What are some pieces of advice you have for soldiers for like training or countering, being prepared for when those resources are mitigated?
Well, it all goes back to shoot, move, and communicate, right? So you're an infantryman, so you're intimately familiar with battle drills, and you're intimately familiar with 7-8, and you're intimately familiar with the soldier skills that are required for the expert infantryman's badge. Those aren't going away. I mean, those skill sets, individual training, it's hard sometimes to motivate soldiers to do things like that when there's all this cool stuff out there. Yeah. You want to get your hands on the latest FBT CB2 systems. You want to get your hands on this portable common operating picture, that suite of software that replaced like the old CPOF. You really want to get your hands on that stuff, but at the same time, you still got to be able to dead reckon with a compass and a map during the day and at night. You still have to be able to put a single channel radio into operations, load it, enter and leave the net. You still got to be able to call for fire using a map and a lensetic compass and a pair of binos with a reticle scale in it. So, I would not discourage anyone from still, I call it the EIB stuff, but it's not just, it's not just applicable to infantrymen. Hey, this is what you need to do your job, or hey, this is what you need to do to be good at your job. It's applicable to all soldiers. All those we used to call it common tasks, or CTT, common task training. That should never be a training strategy that we abandon. We should always be able to, if it's a traditional guardsman at drill, a team leader takes out his fire team out in the field, and they do movement to contact, they do movement formations and movement techniques, how to IMT, how to call for fire, how to land navigate with a map and a compass. You absolutely have to be able to do that stuff, because if there's anything that we know about technology, it will fail. And if there's anything that we know about our adversaries, especially China, they're trying to find ways to defeat those capabilities and that technology. So, yeah, and especially when you think about development of weapons like electromagnetic pulse weapons that would just knock out all your C4I systems, then what are you going to do? You're going to be an analog soldier in a digital world.
So something that I found super interesting that you said was the light tanks, coming to the light infantry fight, which is not a capability that's existed before, or at least in recent years.
No, it's a game changer.
Yeah, what is your advice to young leaders specifically as they're kind of looking at some of these new capabilities that are going to exist, and the way they plan and train to execute tasks?
Well, without doing a shameless plug for the Marine Corps, I would say study how the Marine Corps fights. The Marine Corps has always fought with light tanks. You know, you have tanks and you have dismounted infantry, and they use them for force protection. They use them to maneuver on the battlefield. It's always, you know, the Marines have always fought with tanks as part of infantry fire maneuver. So, you know, until the Army develops a doctrine for the mobile protected firepower platform, look at what the Marine Corps does.
So, sir, out of all the emerging technology that you can talk about with us here today, what's something that really sticks out to you as, you know, most interesting?
Autonomous robotic systems. You know, I tell people if they ever want to try to predict the future, read Gene Roddenberry, who wrote the Star Trek series, Isaac Asimov, famous science fiction writer, James Cameron, the guy that wrote the Terminator series. Artificial intelligence and autonomous learning robotic systems, it's a scary concept, because our culture, the military culture, is we want the man in the machine, right? And even if the man is not in the machine, we want wherever the controls are for that machine to be operated by a man. Now we're talking about a system that thinks for itself, that does for itself, that uses all sorts of input, algorithms, heat, light, any kind of input that you can imagine to learn and make decisions. And that's not the future. That's here and now. When I talked about SCO and DARPA earlier, that's the kind of things that they're working on. And if you're a service chief, you're a 4-star general, that might be worrisome to you. You know, what am I going to do with all my pilots if I'm the chief of staff of the Air Force, and if this is the wave of the future? You know, air power, air superiority, that's what I do. You know, I train guys to do that. I spend millions of dollars to get them to be able to do that. So now what I do, if I've got a system, a 5th gen or 6th gen fighter that does that for itself, not even remotely, it actually thinks and does because it learns. It takes inputs and learns, teaches itself. You know, I hate to say scary, but you know, it could be kind of scary, a little daunting, but it's going to require a cultural shift on the part of the services. But it's coming. I mean, and it's actually here. If you look at some of the stuff that DARPA is working on, I mean, in an unclassed setting, I can't really talk about that portfolio, but what they're doing with artificial intelligence and quantum computing it's things that we would think about as science fiction, but it's not. It's here now.
So that leads into my next question, which we ask all the guests that come on, and that is, if there's a resource out there that you would recommend to young leaders out there, you know, wanting to know more information related to multi-domain operations, related to modernization, what would it be?
My go-to resource for everything is either the Pentagon Library or the library at National Defense University.
Okay.
Both of them are online. The entire catalog is indexed online. And I would just go in and put in the search engine whatever they're interested in. But I mean, like I said, I mean, some of the stuff is dry. I mean, if you think about doctrine and strategy, it's written by specialists for specialists. But I really would recommend the Army Modernization Strategy. Okay. It's about 115 pages. You can read it on a short flight or a long metro ride, and it's really written at a level, I think, that it doesn't require specialization to understand. But it'll get you excited about what's, and learning builds on learning. Okay. So, you know, you learn about something and you know, you whet your appetite, and then you're just naturally going to pull that thread and learn as much as you can.
So if you also had one piece of advice you'd give to young leaders out there, what would it be?
Wow, this has nothing to do with modernization, and this is just something that I've thought about since the whole COVID-19 normal started back in the first week of March. I would tell leaders to really focus on soldier resiliency.
Okay.
Think about the things that make you resilient. I know the things that make me resilient. So going to the gym, going to church, doing my job. Now we've told people you can't go to church, you can't go to the gym, you can't go to work. So, what are we doing to build resiliency? I mean, some people are intrinsically motivated. I'm going to go out to my garage and hit the punching bag and lift weights. I don't need anyone there screaming at me to do another rep. But some people need that. Some people need that kind of that group dynamic or just one other person to get them through. Same with church. I mean, people go to church for different reasons. And then you can say, well, it's broadcast on television. That's not the same for some people. Mm-hmm. Your job. I mean, some people, that's how they identify with themselves. If people said, who are you and what do you do? What do you do? I'd say, I'm Judd Mahfouz and I'm a soldier. And if I can't be that, have I lost my sense of self? So I would tell leaders out there to just really look at what we're doing to build resiliency in our force in a time where the things that typically enable resiliency aren't there for us. It's a leadership skill. It's our boss, Colonel Blanchard, calls it leadership by walking around. Well, with social distancing, you can't do that, but you can pick up the phone. Yeah. You can certainly check on your subordinates, your soldiers. I mean, I think of my military family as my family. So I call it checking on my family every day. That's what I would encourage leaders to do. And just think about this time and think about the things that we did good, the things that we didn't do so great, and remember that, because it's going to come around again, it's like anything that we do that requires rote memory. The more you do it, the better you get at it, so focus on things like exercises. I was thinking, one day after COVID is not such an issue, maybe we should have a 100% telework exercise. Just stress our systems out, exercise your phone trees, things like that. But resiliency is, I can't really overemphasize that. It's so important for our force, especially right now.
Well, sir, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing some of your knowledge on modernization and multi-domain operations and how National Guard members are impacted and what they can do to prepare.
Thank you. I was happy to do that.
If you'd like more information on any of the topics we discussed today, please contact us at our social media pages in the links below. Tune in to Leaders Recon over the next few weeks as we bring in today's leaders and pioneers to discuss their experiences, share their wisdom, and help you grow as a leader. We will also be announcing opportunities to sharpen your skills and enhance your toolbox as members in today's Army National Guard. See you next time. If you like today's episode of Leaders Recon, please don't forget to subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. You can find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcast.